Well, hello everybody, welcome again. This is the second and the last panel of today. So we had 3 sessions. The opening was a session, we had a break, and we had the second session, which was a panel, and they had a more certain topic, but ours is a little bit fragmented. We have 3 topics here today, which could all be on panel topics. The regional reflections, Turkey's strategic role, and reconstruction. So each and every one of them could have been a standalone, of course, topic for discussion. But unfortunately, we didn't have time for it. We needed to have at least 2 days of symposium if we wanted to go for that. That's why now I will be giving the floor to each colleague to specifically focus on one of the topics. We will start with the second topic, regional reflections. Both in SETA and in Ankara Yıldırım Beyazıt University, Muhammed Hüseyin Mercan, who is closely monitoring and studying the Middle East policy. So he's going to focus on the Arab and Israeli dimension. Then we will have a second presentation from Serhan Afacan, the president of IRAM. Is a well-known name in the think tank world, but particularly specialized in Turkey-Iran relations and Iran-centric regional politics. And after him, we will move to third topic, Turkey's strategic role. Both the minister and Nebi mentioned it during the previous session, although some are denying Turkey had a very strategic role. And we will now elaborate it with a name who has been closely monitoring and studying Syria for over 20 years, who could document every town, every street in Syria, who used to be my PhD student, Oytun Orhan. So he will explain Turkey's role to us. And finally, we will go to the first topic, Reconstruction. We have an economist who is focused on Middle East economies, coming from Istanbul, but also a lecturer and a faculty member at Kırklareli University. Working at Kırklareli University, but also carrying out numerous activities in think tanks in Istanbul as well. So he's going to be focusing on reconstruction. So as Serhan said earlier, we will be talking about destruction. He will be talking about reconstruction. We're siding by hope. Hopefully, the work in and the life in Syria will not be as despotic as it was in the time of the Ba'ath regime. It will not be a state of intelligence anymore. There used to be jokes, remember? If there's a couple living in the same household, if the husband is not from the intelligence sector, definitely the wife is. But this was a controlling regime. But thankfully, a year ago, this regime has been toppled. And there has been significant criticism, of course. There are still some who say that was a pity. But I have always said, since the very first day, being a person who's trying to interpret politics in the Middle East, We don't know if it is going to be better or worse, but there was one reality. One of the worst despotic regimes of the 20th century deserved celebration. It gave us the spirit of celebrations, be it in Syria, Turkey, and Middle East, and for everyone who has been paying attention to Syria enjoyed it. So it was a light of hope. Maybe it wouldn't be wrong to call it a revolution, as we said before. So there is still a lot to be talked, a lot to be written, a lot to be produced, and we are going through this regional post-crisis era. We have been already talking a lot during the time of the crisis. Hopefully, from today onwards, it will be more focusing on the reconstruction, where our Syrian brothers and sisters will no longer face similar threats. That's our wish. And having said those, let me give the floor to Muhammed Hüseyin Mercan. As I said earlier, he will focus on the regional reflections from the angle of Arab and Israeli politics. 10-12 minutes for you. Be grateful if you could wrap up, because I want to leave the floor to our audience as well. If we have questions that could lead to striking discussions, that will be a great contribution of this panel. So we're talking about a historical crossroad, the 8th of December 2024. Exactly 61 years ago, on March 8, the Ba'ath Party had organized a coup, changing the administration in Syria, and the Ba'ath-centering ideological model of Syria was then established. In 1979, with the change of the president, Musaidi-centered bureaucracy was established. As said before, it was one of the remaining despotic, most strict, difficult regimes, because what was essential is the interest and the safety of the regime was beyond everything, and regime, when perceived any threat, could just simply eliminate it. But on another note, although there was this very oppressive mentality, they had this pragmatic policy for international politics. For example, if we recall Henry Kissinger and his famous statement that the Cold War is, and during the time of Cold War, he said there would be no war without Egypt and no peace without Syria. So Assad, when he was doing this, he did carry out his wishes through three main pillars. He utilized the Arabic nationality as well as religion and anti-Israeli positions. And by using his foreign policy, he said, in my absence, all the other groups will take over Syria and it will be favoring the Zionist management. He built close relations with the Soviets, but also told to the West, particularly to the US, if you don't tolerate me, I will become a total satellite of the USSR. And to the Soviets, he said, if you see me as a satellite and forget about me, myself as an object, then I will just simply turn my face to West. So very well managed the Cold War indeed. And after the 1990s and the end of Cold War, with the new dynamics merging and with the Gulf War taking place and Syria also supporting, or them going to the Madrid Peace Conference in a rush, is all indicators of this conflicting foreign policy they have adopted. On one hand, the Damascus has built this structure, rigid structure, and played this role in the region, which was affected by the Arab Spring, and the silence of some international actors was because of the Syria's attitude, because there was this alliance, always this subtle alliance. If Bashar Assad was leaving, his successor could be a threat to Russia, Iran, or Saudi Arabia states, or even Egypt in the earlier ages. So it could have caused them a lot. This is why they preferred to protect and preserve the existing status quo in Syria, in Egypt, Libya, Yemen, all these changes that were taking place. In Nahtan, for example, getting the highest vote in the parliament in Tunisia, and Mani Urgent Islah getting a position in the parliament. Similarly, in Libya, the returning diaspora gaining a strong position was all a determinant for possible changes in Syria. So there was a very strong transformation coming ahead. So therefore, what the Assad administration did was blindsided. Many people, unfortunately, remained silent, particularly the international community. So this subtle alliance resulted with hundreds and thousands and millions of Syrians' lives. On another note, as of 2024, December the 8th, once the revolution took place, the regional dynamics also were shifted. So we might commemorate Sezai Alakoç and refer to his poet. What is Jerusalem telling me? Do you remember? I will bring it all the way from Damascus, the body and the grave of Suleiman the prophet. So this is of a great reference. This is about the paradigm shift with Damascus, how the triggered fault lines plays an important role, but how also the roof to Jerusalem crosses through Damascus.
Therefore, when we are talking about Syrian revolution today, in the regional subsystem, and when we look at the dynamics, the external policy parameters, and what is the approach of the other actors should be considered carefully, because a stabilized Syria and a Damascus might have an establishing mission, and with the oncological codes in the Arabic world or in the Middle East, they can resemble a very important context. And that's why we should not ignore this fact of being an important potential players, because it is one of the most important columns of the Arabic Union. And in Syria, it is on cultural language context it continued, and there is an important accumulation for a strong civilization and intellectual ground and a religious background were there. And stabilizing this society, ensuring its wealth, will have a very important role. Along with that, again, starting with Tel Aviv, some actors in the region can try sabotaging the transition process in Syria. And this is also somehow related to that too. And when we talk about Syria there, again, the basic actor that we can look at is the invading country itself. And this aggressive invasion understanding they have, and over the 2 years they've been genociding in Palestine and Gaza, and they are trying to reach out their own religious objectives. and on the other hand, they are trying to destroy the powerful sets that they might stand against them. Because this change in Syria, beyond everything, has a potential to stop the invasion of Israel. The intelligence president of Israel told that we are the assurance of the security of Israel. They say that if you collapse us somehow, and if you have an other attitude, the others will make you pay more. And again, a Mossad official told that we know that Bashar is evil, but rather than an evil that we don't know, we prefer an evil that we know. So it shows the bilateral relation the previous government of Syria and Israel looks like. And even though they seem uh, in the position of each other, there is a cooperation. There was a cooperation behind that. But now with the Shara government, there is a new reality that is being built, and it might mean that there is going to be a new process. And when you look at his first frame, and when you look at the first practices in the Arabic world, the tradition continues, and they first visited Riyadh, for example. This this was an important development because thanks to this occasion, somehow they solidified their legitimacy, and also over the Saudi Arabia, they gave a message to Western world that they are open for dialogue. And this Saudi Arabia visit also gave a message to Jordan saying that this doesn't have an invasive purpose. Our objective is to being faithful to our borders and to recover Syria. For all of these reasons, at regional scale, the approach of Arabic world to this case, reconstructing the Damascus and for its recovery, putting their efforts, this behavior started along with that relational process actually. But before I end my words, I would like to express that, of course, there's going to be an important change process, and the revolution is important, but it is a very sensitive process that cannot be romanced, actually. And His Excellency Minister emphasized that yes, there is a change, but along with this change, there are new risks and new challenges along with that. So Tel Aviv and their being Tel Aviv's instabilization approach is the biggest problem of Damascus right now. And the Derzis in Iraq, they are not residing there. Some part of them might be encouraged by Tel Aviv, and against Damascus, they might be pushed to rebel, or maybe a new movement, and maybe they are looking for new solutions to find new rebellions, and also the integration process might be damaged along with these movements. And when we think of Tel Aviv pressures, the Syrian foreign policies, maybe first priority will be how to develop a strategy against the invasive country. It is important. This transition is a very important process. And again, I would like to say that in this sensitive period, the international society should provide the full support. Right at this point, dear Shara, in the UN General Council, the speech was very important. He mentioned that when we look at the style and the discourse, it shows the framework of the new Syria, especially to Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Qatar. He thanked a lot and also taught Arabic and Islam world. And in addition to these, he also thanked United States and European Union too. It shows the integration process of Damascus to the international society. And especially, at least the Bay countries will continue to provide this reconstructive supports, especially the Turkey strategical context was shared. So I won't be talking about Turkey context, not because of any specific reason, but the other actors will be explained by Serhan, Professor Serhan. So I would like to explain that as a last sentence. They're not being stopped and they're not being limited will slow down Syria or it can even prevent it. This is the biggest risk. Thank you. Thank you very much, dear Hüseyin. And there was one thing that I would like to share with you is the first one. When it comes to Middle East, there wouldn't be a war without Egypt and wouldn't be a peace without Syria. The people that follow the Bay policies like me says that there won't be any normalization without Saudi Arabia. This was highlighted by the Hussein actually. There might be three important countries in the Arabic world. The second aspect is related to Israel. And regarding to Israel and regarding the West, these aspects are very important. For the Middle East study researchers like us, there are two Wests actually. There is one West, the states that are working for their purposes, and there are countries who were placed to the heart of Middle East, the exploiting project, which is Israel. And the reason why I say two separate vests is the first vest is quite rational. They are working in line with their own users and they can normalize their relations. But when you look at the West or the Middle East, they change the mask they wear and they leave all the values, principles, international law. They think that nothing is considered by Western people. So the second phase, the second side of West is quite dangerous actually. And you see the people who are reacting against that. In Germany, for example, they are trying to find a young person and there is an elderly person and the elderly person is being beaten by police. So even you can criticize governments in Germany, and it wouldn't be a problem. But if you criticize Israel in Germany, you will be exposed to all the negative behavior. And unfortunately, the same situation is there in England or United States too. Unfortunately, the other side, the other face of the West is quite actually important. And this, there was a list. It is not only one Western country, but there are also some big Western countries who are partner of that crime. Thank you very much. And now I would like to leave the floor to Serhan Afacan. Well, thank you very much for the organization. And in the previous panel, we have listened to many important speeches and we will continue to do so. Dear Shara, if I'm not wrong, it was 24th of September in the UN General Council. He had a speech and he mentioned about that speech, and there was a reference, and one of the reference is the Iran Islamic Republic. And we know that Iran in Syria has some problems. As people following Iran, we've been talking about that for a long time, and the people in Iran are talking about that too. What happened and what was the results in terms of Syria. And when you look at the point that we are in right now, especially the regional countries located in the region, there is I'm trying to not read it as a losing paradigm. Actually, I don't think that Iran lost something. I think what is happening in Syria is like a process of normalization. Of course, there are some pros and cons, but based on their global and regional normalization process, that's how I am trying to approach it. But unfortunately, the Iran's approaches are making it difficult because Iran thinks that it's a loss and they're trying to find some actors because of it. Well, for Iran in the worst scenario, when you look at these deductions, they made a loss out of their profit. As of 20 December of 2024, Iran won't be that effective, but the abnormal thing was their effectiveness until the 2024. So they made a loss out of their profit, we can say that. In 8th of December, we have seen three different reactions from the government regarding what happened in Syria. First one is, of course, supporting, just like Turkish Republic. They supported the oppositions and they were pleased to see Assad is fall. And there were a second group. They were more like wait and see. As you remember, after the day of 8th of December, he told that His Excellency Minister told that the day is not the day of wait and see, but the United States and Russia can be listed like this. And there were a third category. They were against the new government. Iran is one of these countries. That's where I would like to point out. Iran, one of these countries. They were against the new government, starting with the Shara. They thought that they are terrorists for the jihad purposes, and they insisted on it. For example, United States makes a lot of mistake in the policy, in the foreign policies, but they can take quick actions to fix or correct or change them. But Iran couldn't do that. And in the past 1 year, Iran's behaviors pushed us to see it as a loss for Iran. So what Iran lost there and why they are so discomforted. First, of course, the ABC of the case is that from Iraq to Syria, then towards Lebanon, they lost their land connection. Strategically, it is impossible, not difficult, it is impossible to repair. And Iran also continued to discuss that. Second, and it is also important as first, is they lost their only one and only government state country level friend. This resistance strategy was bought. Uh, that's what we mean. And they were usually non-governmental bodies. But Syria was an exemption to that. It is not only about the Arabic Spring, of course, but it is also about the Iran-Iraq war. It has such background. And Iran didn't have any economic loss. They didn't have any economic loss because of that. Uh, Maybe I can talk about that later on, but Iran, in the recent months, they are publishing interesting reports and researches. And their main focus point is that Iran and international society relations should be fixed. Again, we cannot continue to work like this. We cannot manage the economy like this, and we cannot get out of this bottleneck. But in this direction, again, their economic partners and addresses, they conducted a research, and Syria does not take any place. So Syria never been an economic partner of Iran. So Iran didn't have any economic contribution. And we have also look at the reports and we see that almost 50 billion US dollars is lost by Iran in Syria. But Iranian people say that we paid for this money to support Assad regime, and that's what they say. And how do we know about that? The people know about 20, 30 billion US dollars, but where do we know that it is $50 billion? In August of 2023, a hacker group leaked some documents and informations from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Iran, and this of Iran asked Syria for some oil reservoirs, some mines, and they told that give back what we have given to you. In exchange of that, we would like to utilize oil and mines, etc. But they, of course, they are impossible to verify. But these are some documents that were leaked. But because of this misinvestments, they lost this money. We can say that. If not, again, Iran's effectiveness in Syria so far was quite a profit, but it was unsustainable, and it was for sure that it is not going to continue forever. So why Iran was so insistent on Syria? Why Iran focused on keeping Syria at its hands a lot under the name of resistance, anti-Zionism, anti-capitalism, because it costs a lot to Iran. There is human cost too. Every day or every passing day, an Iran general or the commander were killed, for example, and they were hit by Israel, etc. And there were also economic sanctions, and they have become an issue even in the streets of Iran. So they stopped. There were even protests in the streets, and the people didn't also like this idea of supporting Syria or the other countries that much. So previously there were some sympathetic people over the Iran. They said that when there are conflicts in North Africa, you supported people in Egypt, Libya. When it comes to Syria, you make people terrorists. Why did it become like this? This was the question actually, and why Iran insisted on it that much. This was the question.
Well, without discussing and elaborating this with many historical references, I recall from the first panel there was a question which was also looking into whether the Turkey's position and stronger power would be an issue for Arab states. Well, Iran is one of the countries that do not want to have a regional status quo established in the Middle East, because no matter what, it will be, he knows and they know that based on the Arab reality, and that's what is expected. The Arab Union has been trying to achieve this since 1945. Also, in a limited manner, the Gulf Cooperation Organization is also doing the same. So, Iran is therefore is not willing to have a status quo established there. I can also give you some historical references, because in 1955, Iran becoming a part of the Baghdad part was more or less because of that reason. 1973, when we had the oil embargo, Iran's also stance is just about this. During the time of the Shah, during the Cold War, this was a reflex that made the Iran-Israel relations grow, the concern of Arabs joining and converging. And also a reference from the recent history to make it stronger. In 2023 May, if you may recall, Syria, when re-accepted to the Arab Union, the Iran and Syria had already started falling apart. And Iran repeatedly had discourses that Assad, particularly Syria, is not a reliable, trustworthy partner. So therefore, since there can't be an Arab reality that can be established with Syria present, Iraq is already missing. So Iran was once again trying to prevent aesthetic established in the Middle East. So these are overall lines of this issue and the background. So what is Iran going to do? I have very small time left, so I will leave some of them into question and answers. Iran officially has not changed its stance or attitude, is not willing to have an engagement with the Damascus government. But the Damascus, on the other hand, the government and administration is further unwilling, more unwilling. So it's not that Damascus is inviting and Iran is refraining. No. And secondly, there is also this reality that Iran is still waiting. Maybe the Damascus government is not in full control of the territory. We have seen it is in Laske or Swearmount as well. Iran was not there at all, but we saw Iran's attitude. And also when it comes to SDG and PKK and others, we know Iran's attitudes are very important as well. I'm expecting there will be some questions with regards to SDG. The SDG and Iran's relations are more critical and vital than what we imagined. Iranian militia once excavated from Iran when they were going to the Karbala and Najaf area in Iraq. SGD helped Iran a lot in those evacuations. And also we could even say that when the Bashar government administration was almost falling in from March 2011 onwards, on the northern Syria, if the SDG was being able to gain power, it is because of Iran, because there was a calculation on the Iranian side that that presence would have consequences on Turkey. So Iran, I don't think in the short run change its attitude, change its stance, because Syria doesn't seem to be changing it. Secondly, Iran has other priorities and agenda, as we all know. They just received a very serious stroke from Israel, and they are looking into maybe move forward with US, and they had started negotiations on 10th of April, but after the fifth round, that also ended up with no success. So Syria is not Iran's number one priority, and Syria is not inviting to Iran. So therefore, we can conclude that this policy of Iran bouncing between two sides will continue based on his negotiations with the West. Well, they might adopt their Syrian policy as well. Well, thank you very much for your answer. That was a very enlightening presentation. We had to discuss Iran as one of the most important actors. Well, indeed, Syria, as soon as it was drawn into this internal conflict in 2011, really caught Iran offside. They had the pan-Islamist discourse in the Iran before, up until then, and they had to leave all of their discourse aside and go back to a conflict-provoking sect, religious sect-based approach. And they will have to stay in the same tone for a while. Also, yes, I do agree that there can't be an Arab Union without Syria. The Egyptian authorities still are continuing with this historical claim. Remember, by the end of 1950s and beginning of 1960s, they had established this temporary Arab Republic with Syria. In terms of its strategic depth, both Sudan on the south and on the north, the Syria would be altogether. Egypt, in my opinion, is the only heavyweight actor in the Arab world. And it was a sign that Egypt is unwilling to leave those two countries alone. Maybe there can be a Egypt-centered Central Arab region projection possible, and Syria would play a very critical role in it. And currently there is the wording now in the name, official name of the country, Syrian Arab Republic. So being Arab will continue to preserve its prominence. So now let's move towards Turkey. Well, even going back to the Ahmet Necdet Sezer's presidency, there was this normalization process with himself attending to the funeral. And after AKP came to lead and Bashar came to lead, the son Bashar came to lead, came to force, we saw that the bilateral relations turned into strategic interest. People were dining in Aleppo, and were coming to Gaziantep for a dessert. So there was this very significant cross-border societal, political, or more or less an integration we had back in the time. And once the conflicts arose, we all knew what happened, and the minister explained our role and our stance. So, with all of its retrospective and prospective sides, we would like to leave you the floor to hear more. Well, thank you very much first for your uh, opening remarks for this discussion point. Well, of course, I will approach the Syrian issue from a Turkish perspective, but when we speak of Turkish perspective, we end up going back to Syria's priorities. Well, in the pre-revolution, we know that it was anti-terror, and the second was, the voluntary safe return of the Syrians in Turkey. But now with the revolution, we're talking about a new Syria, a geopolitical change, which means that, as also mentioned during the minister's speech, as well as Talha's speech, we're talking about reconstruction and economy of Syria, which means that now Syria's priorities are directly priorities of Turkey. Every matter in Syria is a matter of Turkey as well. Reconstruction, economy, utilities, water supply, building the public institutions, security are now priorities of Turkey as well. So therefore, looking at the pre and post-revolution era, the existing problems still stand to be existing problems, of course, in terms of those combats we have against those problems. There are new methods that are applied, or more optimistic is that we have, let's say, stronger instruments to cope with them. And this new era is really coming along with significant new challenges as well. So not everything is sugar candy, but compared to past, it looks like the circumstances are better for Turkey. But there's still a lot to be done on a long time. But allow me to repeat that every problem of Syria has indirectly become a problem for Turkey. So when it comes to domestic affairs, it's not only about combating terror there. Maybe we can give Iraq as an example and use it as a case. Also, there was a reference to lessons learned from Iraq in the minister's speech. The Iraqi example is a striking one for Turkey. And in comparison to Iraq, since their invasion, they have been unable to build their political stability, coping with numerous problems, and on the southern borders of Turkey, having this political entity has caused many problems. For more than 20 years, Turkey is trying to cope with it. In comparison to Iraq example, Syria is more, let's say, hopeful. Why? Because the state authority has been completely destroyed. In Syria, at least, the although the capacity, state capacity has weakened, there is still bureaucracy in place, unlike the Iraq where it was completely destroyed. So that's a great chance for us. there can be a less problematic transition for Syria compared to Iraq. And national identity, awakening of national identity. Well, Iraq has been invaded, and this rebuilt structure there also is based on the Lebanon model, let's say, with the separation of different ethnicities and so on. Syria also went through something similar due to the conflict and war. However, relatively we can see the national identity is preserved and protected, or at least the one that has weakened before can be just simply made stronger again and gain its strength. Yes, Iraq has been invaded by external force and still a part of a regional power play together with Lebanon, but Syria at least has not been totally invaded by external militaries, has been affected by them, but not been invaded. And we think that can still have its own maneuvers, political maneuvers. So from those point of view, it looks like the conditions in Syria are more lucrative. So, what have we done since the revolution in the last 1 year? Maybe we can have a dual separation here: domestic steps in the terms of security and economy, and international and foreign affairs steps. With regards to foreign affairs and foreign policies, in my consideration, which is widely accepted, that Syrian administration really moved and progressed fast in terms of being acknowledged and recognized by international counterparts. That was their number one priority. It was also Turkey's number one priority. We were all concerned whether this new administration would be accepted by the rest of the region as well as the international arena and the community, but they have really done a lot in terms of achieving and collecting results. In the domestic politics, we see that there are still some challenges ongoing and emerging due to the effect of Israel as well. This is another one, for example, it's an emerging one, emerging challenge. And we have already discussed all of those, so I'm not going to go into the domestic challenges at all here on this stage. But my own consideration is that those gainings and winnings in the foreign policy would be determinant in coming up with the solutions for the domestic ones, because now the Syria issue since the beginning of this crisis has produced and given birth to so many instabilities that everyone is in desperate need of stabilization in the region. Therefore, everyone is waiting for and hoping that the new administration will rebuild peace and government, and Syria will be a stable country with a political stability in its neighborhood and the region. So this regional agreement will be a great opportunity for Syria to produce its solutions. We are all aware that yes, Syria still has SGD as well as SETA as the coastal issue, the economic fragile uh, environment, as well as the political compositions, inherent risks. However, those all can be managed, in my opinion. But the worst case scenario would be a external actor provoking the domestic ongoing conflicts. So that is the number one risk. For the political transition to take place, it is of critical importance that external factors are not adversely affecting the domestic affairs. We're talking about a new structure here and the dynamics which have been affected by what happened back in March. So it is, of course, it's not only about that a piece of land, but it has an effect on the future of Syria and Turkey. Also, it will play a significant role in terms of determining the political form of the state, Syrian state. And currently, there is a political de facto status in the given region, sub-region. So it is also encouraging all other organizations in the country which are not willing to follow the administration of the Damascus government. Well, I am an optimist. I try to be optimist, but it can't be only explained by being purely an optimist. I think the conditions and the dynamics are currently leading us toward being optimistic for the future of Syria. As I said earlier, this is more about the external factors, and I can once again state that the external factors will define the domestic factors. So, how about its connection with Turkey? All of them do have, yes, a direct relation to Turkey, and the YPG and SGD are still continuing to be problems. What has changed in the last 1 year? Maybe the military shift has been one. From the political diplomatic point of view, there is now a political will to solve this issue as of the 10th March memorandum. But what have we done since then? Not much has been done. In terms of Turkey, to compete with this struggle, let's say, to work in this struggle, has more means. Thankfully, in Damascus, there is a government. So now we have a trust relation, sharing a parallel vision. So political elite is in Damascus at the moment. This is an advantage for Turkey. When it comes to difference between Turkey and Syria, they may be sharing some similar visions, but their priorities are different as well as capacities are different. For Syria, number one priority is not SDG issue, but it's equally as important for them as well. But for them, the most important win is the regional and international legitimacy. This was more important. Economical situation is very important as well. As we've said before, we have all one way or another visited Syria after the revolution, and we have all been informed that the basic services, utilities, sanctions, when will they be lifted? These are all important. Well, US is an incredible leverage when it comes to the sanctions, and they are really expecting US to play its hand. So in terms of determining the priorities of Syria, the SDG is going to be playing a significant role, and their capacity is different accordingly.
But SDG is still a problem in this regard. Israel's role is important and it is risky actually. And in terms of the role that Israel is going to play in Syria is, yes, the United States position. That's the most important aspect. And if United States administration first started to achieve a result, although Turkey, but it shows that it is not that possible. After such a point, returning that balance is not the case. I think the United States is also aware of the situation too. In the upcoming period, the sensitivities of Turkey will also be considered, and a balance between Turkey and Israel will be there. Actually, the new order will be built upon that. In this regard, of course, the Israel's policies won't be important on its own, but Turkey's position will also be quite critical. And as I previously said, between Turkey and Israel, and also between the Damascus and SDG, finding a balance is really important. And America's only addressee is not the SDG. The addressee relations are not changing. The CENTCOM is the institution who conducts Syrian policies, and they are increasing more and more institutional relations. And SD rather than SDG, Damascus is on the foreground right now, and the top level discussions with Shara are now conducted. So this will change the relations, and the importance of SDG, SEF will change enormously. So this will be the main aspect. And of course, the United States pressure towards SDF might be important, but also there is a need to change the balances on the field too. Apart from that, the unsettled requests won't be there, I guess. So a military option is on the desk, I assume. Sometimes the Syrian officials and sometimes Turkish officials make similar explanations regarding that. And these cloggings can always be seen on the field in this regard. When you look at Minbij and its around, there are always local conflicts where we see in witness. And therefore, the solution to this conflict will be on this balance. That's how it looks like. To finalize again regarding to Syrian people in Turkey, again before and after the revolution, the perceptions are different. Before the revolution, as it was explained by His Excellency Minister, he said that we had to pay some political costs, and there were some conflicts across country too. But after the development, after the revolution, the perception is changed, and everybody is aware of that. The settings and the environment for return is now there. And when Syrian people get back to Syria, they won't be exposed to a security aspect. That's their belief. But we need time, because the only reason behind migration is not only about security, but also economic reasons will be there too. But the reconstruction that hasn't still been there yet. So far, there is a reasonable and acceptable return number, and the Syrian people in Turkey, rather than being a risky field, it is an opportunity actually where they can have a bridge, and where the people have their connection to Turkey. They can establish bridges between Syria and Turkey, and in terms of economy, maybe there might be new networks too. So these people will be working as the bridges. This aspect is still important. Syrian peoples returning to their country is not only the priority of Turkey, but it is also a priority for Syria too, because the demographic picture of the country has totally changed. And everybody is talking about the elections, but more than half of the country migrated. Demographic structure changed. In such a setting, national will uh, elections won't be possible. So the normalization process is really needed. So to be able to provide a solution to that over time, the conditions are there. Previously, again, the Syrian people's return to their countries were wanted, but in the practice, they did their best. But now, sincerely, they want to return to their countries, and that's the Syrian government. Actually, they sincerely want their citizens back in their country. That's what that will be my final word. Thank you. Yes. Again, the many important aspects you mentioned, and I think regarding when it comes to SDF and PKK, it is really important. PKK emerged around the end of the 70s, 1970s, and more than 20 years they were under protection of Baath regime in Damascus. And Turkey around the end of 1990s, after this strict position of Turkey, along with the Bay War and with the power gap coming from these wars, overall Syria, uh, they went to Iraq, northern Iraq, again another Baath regime, and they've been working there more than 20 years. But Turkey has close relations to these two countries now. And that's why combating against PKK or SDF, again, uh, there is not a state that can protect them. There are two alternatives, Israel and Iran, as it was previously underlined by Serhan. Afacan, again, Iran, they have more defensive positions. Their stance is more defensive right now. Therefore, His Excellency Minister identified the elephant in the room, Israel. But Israel doesn't have a direct connection to the Kurdish population. That's why there might be only transportation methods. That could be the only method they can have. And maybe we need to look at this aspect too about the corridors that they would like to establish or pave. But I don't think that it will be that easy. Hopefully, it won't be possible or easy at all. But the entrance was quite important, I guess. The priorities of Turkey is the priority of Syria, actually, and he listed down the priorities of Syria. In this regard, I think that it is important to assess this case. And His Excellency President, since the first years, thought that this is the internal process of Turkey was the idea. But there is one other important aspect, is Turkey, I can say, regarding the migrant. I wish we wouldn't have this negative impact, negative picture, because it influenced us, not only the Syrian people. For the first time in history, even though a very limited number, there were some racist actions, and it's now tried to be institutionalized. As a history reader, in our history, we never had such concept like regarding racism, but now it will almost be there. But hopefully, with this process, a reverse process will be there, and this racism that has started to be occurring will be exterminated totally. And now, I would like to leave the floor to Taha Eğri, who will be talking more on reconstruction phase. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to extend my greetings, and I would like to thank SETA for their kind invitation. It's been a long day, and there were lots of different topics. We talked about the last year, and we provided our assessments from different perspectives. And in the end of the day, actually, policy and economy is integrated. And right now, we are in the economic part of it. There was no escape from economy. Economy sets, identifies the policy, the foreign policy. As an economist, of course, I put economy in the center, but policy also identifies the path of economy too. So stability is another important concept, actually, in the upcoming years of Syria. To ensure their continuity, to ensure their reconstruction, first thing they need is stability. That's the key word. Because to be able to have external investments in Syria, in ensuring the employment, all of them will be possible with the stability. Of course, what do we mean by stability? It is not only something that we see on its own, the stability develops with a preference. As a preference, it is also about what kind of a preference that you're going to have. And when we look at the past year and regarding the content of it, 3 years ago there was an analysis essay from SETA Foundation, and there was a comprehensive assessment, and I would like to explain a bit about that study to you. There is an institutional structure, an economic structure side of it. What do we mean by economic structure is the infrastructure, industry, agriculture, and the sectoral activities. And the institutional structure is the legal or the political preferences that are underlying these processes. In the past year, when you look at the picture for this year and for the upcoming years, that's where Syria should focus on. And in the morning session, His Excellency Minister talked about the expenses and costs. It is difficult to measure, of course, but Syria lost 60% of 10 years ago, and there is 40% capacity only. But there are some economic activities too. The regional consumption, production are still there. We should not ignore this fact. For those who didn't see the field, there is an activity, but the national income it decreased around 60%, and the inflation lost, and the Syria currency lost values against dollars like 300 times. So The destruction was huge. Millions of people were displaced, physical and human capital was lost. And now it has to be recovered. And in terms of recovery process, there are some efforts. We have seen that over the course of the last year, especially with the leadership of Saudi Arabia and Qatar. In Syria, some economic activities are starting. And as a first emergency aspect was the electricity and the residences, the buildings, cement investments behind that. Recently to Damascus, 24-hour based electric supply, power supply has started. Previously, it was for 8 hours, but in Damascus right now, it is 24 hours. Here again, Turkey and Saudi Arabia had a joint project regarding the power supply chains. Uh, and in cement sector, Saudi Arabia, and also in the telecommunication sector, Saudi Arabia continue to invest. These investments, of course, are long-term investments. So the stability word again will be the key. If you are going to have a cement factory, even increasing the capacity will take 1 or 2 years, but these infrastructure investments from scratch will take even more time. And maybe the most important part might be that in the strategical dimensions we can focus on the Tarsus and Laskia port operational rights. The Tarsus port belongs to Russia, but right now United Arab Emirates and UK companies took it, and they also made a promise around 1 billion US dollar. So, and they will work on capacity building as a result of this promise. And there were also some promises, but when it comes to process and stability, and when it comes to revolution, the agreement have changed, and it changed its position too. As a result, the Russian investments turned into French investment. This might be acceptable for the country, but when they are not stable, these investments may not be realized. When there is an instability case in United Arab Emirates or the other French companies can withdraw, and there are some long-term risks for Syria. Again, the residence is another important aspect in terms of the voluntary returns from Turkey, providing some incentives too, the residences, constructions, and also the property rights. So there are Syrian people who are displaced. When they get back to their buildings, for example, how they are get their property rights, how they're going to be assessed. There is another risky field regarding that. When you look at the figure, 200 or 400 billion dollar of infrastructure construction is needed based on the World Bank reports. So this $400 billion is a very huge number. So we need to explain that a bit more. We don't talk about that all the time, but agriculture in Syria is another important topic. After 2008 crisis, the global increases in the prices, food prices, was an important factor to start the Arabic Spring, actually. This was also mentioned in literature too. And drought, the scarcity is still there for Syria too. And in terms of their fundamental basic food needs, it might be problematic. Right now, there might be some solutions like providing external resources, but self-sufficient fundamental needs supply is important. And to be able to reach out to this objective, infrastructure should be updated. For example, Syria, if you think that Syria will start development from scratch, first they need to start with the food. And irrigation infrastructure is very important for this purpose. Uh, Rather than a rain-based, precipitation-based agriculture, irrigation systems should be developed and installed. This is important. When it comes to the emergent needs, they may not be that important in the building or employment, but agriculture can also ensure a wide scope employment actually. But of course, the financial architecture is important. Another important aspect, it was also mentioned regarding the United States sanctions, and it is mainly about the financial aspects. Actually, in the last decade, the Syria was externalized from the global systems, and they were disconnected from all the financial system.
It is so such that not only international money transfer, but the domestic money transfer is non-existent at the moment. So this is where the US sanctions becomes prominent. So with regards to external investment, foreign investment, Syria should need to be integrated to a financial system. Positive steps have been taken accordingly. For those sanctions, Caesar sanctions of the US, conditionally has been kind of weakened for the next 180 days. There was a symbolic correspondence with the Syrian central bank, which gave us some signals of a system integration coming along. However, the sanctions with only a conditional 180 days condition and cause will be still carrying some risk. It's still a risk for the foreign investors. These have to be all removed, and Syria should be able to attract foreign investment. The second part is about the institutional part. So if you don't have stability in place, the Syrian experience has showed us that in 3 years you may lose overall infrastructure, billions of dollars. Yes, you may invest, but one conflict may cause you to all investment just simply in 3 years, like the drama that is taking place in Gaza. If you don't have a persistent and permanent solution there, even if you reconstruct Gaza, it may take a month with the modern warfare technology and modern warcraft to be completely destroyed. Therefore, permanent and persistent solutions are a must for the stability. Helen mentioned it during her earlier speech. Institutional structures today are an advantage on Syrian side. The Shura temporary government has this power in their hand, and using this power, they can modify the political structure and diversify it. For example, a parliament or constitution or a central bank, they do have the power of transition to decide how they should be formed. And this power of transiting and transitioning is an advantage for the next 30 years to come. So when you just put small pieces together, we know that you start to get the overall picture. The type of the system you want to build, whether a liberal market or a Chinese model or state capitalism, or like going back to the Syrian history and the Baha system, a semi-socialist Arab socialist system, which allows, let's say, private ownership and property, but the investment is to be done by the state. So they really need to quickly decide on the way to go. Currently, looks like they are more moving towards a private sector. So the cement, electricity, as well as housing contracts are involving private companies of Gulf states as well as Turkey. Well, of course, some segments may be criticizing that this fast liberalism, flash liberalism, can be harming for Syria because they don't have that experience even before. So therefore, that shock or fast liberalism may have more problems for Syria, creating new elite classes and would prevent this welfare and growth reaching to every segment of the society. We need to be careful about that because we have similar experiences in the Middle East, be it Egypt, for example. When they first gained independence, they had this shock liberalism in place dictated by the British, and they created this elite. And on one hand, this also contributed to the Nasser, of course, coup. And Nasser, on the other hand, also kind of like hold on to liberal policies for a while he was first serving, and they went through another transformation only the following years. So when we look at the republic, 1923 to 1929 is a more liberal era of Turkey's first establishment, and there are some reasons. For example, this customs protectionism could not be exercised for a time of 5 years due to Lausanne Agreement. Although the founder had to end up choosing liberal policies, they did not have the private investment capital to promote it. This is why from 1929 onwards, they have the first industrial development plan and others where the state is building the infrastructure. So this is why they were developmentalist, let's say, for a long time, expanding into the rurals of Anatolia. So probably looking into examples of Egypt and Turkey, there should be a model designed for Syria. Maybe the urgent needs may lead those empowered to ignore the necessity of a formalized method, but they should not allow that to happen and draw their long-term map. Well, of course, Syria's conditions are not similar to ours. For example, Assad, when he came to power, he had this minority management and also merchants collaboration system, which brought Syria all the way to here. The Bas Politburo and all of them together were acting as three pillars of the system. And this is probably still the reflex of the institutions still existing today in Syria. So they should decide how to relate themselves with the existing elites and the new emerging elites, and which economic model they will apply. Either it will be more liberal or more state capitalist, whether it will be the Arab socialist model, because we know in the long run that institutions to secure the legitimacy of the regimes can be a barrier for mass development and mass welfare. So if your structure is based only for the sake of your legitimacy, you might have an autocracy established, but you will have still excluded certain segments of the society. We already mentioned the Syrian diaspora abroad. For example, the ones in the Gulf countries, whether they can return to Syria to invest to Syria. But without a framework, it would mean that new elites will merge, and the regime would again become authoritarian and the general public drawn into poverty, making them more vulnerable. And if, for example, people would show reaction based on economic reasons to this new government, we would see how the external actors would react to that. If people of Syria protest because Sharia administration failed to meet their economic needs, we need to know how we will position ourselves. So this can be explained to people like, okay, here is this model. 5 years, 10 years, we will suffer economic reconstruction. It's not that easy. We need to reestablish industrial facilities, roads, infrastructure, utilities. Won't be easy and overnight. But in the 5-year term, 10-year term, in the midterm, we can see a population-wide economic development in Syria, but it requires some patience. It can be tried, but if you don't set and establish your plans clearly, the risk will be heightened. So therefore, a gradual and controlled reform is necessary. So the commercial system, the financial system, the investment system should be gradually growing and in a controlled manner. Global integration is critical. Syria is strategically located when it comes to East Mediterranean trade. For example, the Haifa port of Israel, as well as Turkey and Syria, they all play a significant role. So we are all facing China's competition to beat the US trade, and we are on the crossing path, whether it can be our ports or land road and land path all the way to Europe. Therefore, in terms of trade and in terms of transportation, Syria should be a global integrated partner. Social policy is inevitable, of course. There's no question it needs to be well established because, similar to Egypt, subsidies have been used for a long, long time there, and these societal habits are not easy to overcome. Therefore, a social policy should be designed and presented while also supporting the people. So we are talking about poor people already. It's not that they are lazy because they have been subsidized, but their educational health needs should be covered, and a very strong social policy encompassing these should be designed and enacted. And while all of those are done and the institutional capacity is built, the most important element is to have a well established transparency in place where people know what has been done, which steps has been taken, and in a planned manner, of course. The administration having strict plans in place, and they should be transparent in those steps they are taking, because one of the critiques during this 1 year was those investment projects that were given to the private sector, and what was the terms of references for those tenders. There should be a terms of reference, no? Yes, this work will be done, but how will it be done? So if you're going to do some electrical wiring here, the wiring channels will be 50 centimeter deep or 100. You need to first decide, write the terms of reference for it before you give it to another private company to implement the project, because they will just go for the cheapest and not care for the best for the government's money. And Turkey's experience will be important here. Turkey's economic reformation and institutional reforms are good examples. And this legal also infrastructure of Turkey can be a guidance to Syria as well, not only economic one or institutional one. Yes, the Gulf countries may just offer and provide the capital, but in terms of their structures, Turkey has more structures in place. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much. On my behalf, when we speak of Syria, in terms of economics, I am very, very optimistic. I think this is because of the DNA of the Syrians now. The land the Syria stands today was the first regular formalized trade took place. This we are talking about a civilization, a land that the Lameth were once living. So they are the first ones who came up with alphabet just to be able to improve the communication for the sake of trade, because we are talking about the Phoenicians. So there is those historical references, but even more importantly, during the time of Ottoman, after Istanbul, the center, the most important metropole for us was Aleppo. Maybe this is why the Aleppians were the ones that also told Turks how to become merchants. So I believe in Aleppo. I believe in Beladus Sham, the Damascus, and I hope that they will all be able to do it. If Aleppo is back in the game, Syria will be back in the game as well. Although we had some delays, and as per the agenda, we were supposed to conclude at 3 p.m., but let's limit it with 4 p.m. We have only 13 minutes left. Very short questions, maybe only, so we can get an answer. Let's start from here with you. 4, 5, and no more. 6, okay. I would like to thank all the panelists for their presentations. You interpreted the economic playground very well, but looking at the Middle East's geography, referring to hyperinflation and so on, Israel is also has gone through similar processes in 1970s, fought against and suffered from hyperinflation, but through international investment with the Russians or the Europeans and others coming to Israel and very quickly taking over the infrastructure have made it easy and possible for Israel to build its infrastructure today. So speaking of Syria now that Syria has different ethnicities, be it as Christians and Muslims and a significant diaspora abroad. So those ones as an investor in peace with the existing government and administration could come back and build maybe economic strength there. How do you predict it? Is that a possibility? I'm talking about the Syrian diaspora returning and also foreign investment as well. Thank you very much. This has been a very productive meeting. Embassy Ali Engin, Professor, Afacan University. In this speech and panel, I have concluded that one of our important strategic approach, which is going into an institutionalization equal to OSCE in the Middle East. Nobody mentioned it, but for a stable peace building, it looks like we need for a kind of an institutionalization, which is similar to Organization for Social and or let's say OSCE. Do you think that could be possible? Or do you think it's still a dream to have something similar to Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe in the Middle East arena? Foreign policy and security researcher, journalist. In my opinion, peace in Syria will set an example for other countries in problems, and it will create a domino effect where Turkey will become a regional and global peace actor. So it will have a spillover effect. And allow me to share an information I received. No, not the. Please, only the question. Iran and the US during the embargo times, those drones and unmanned crafts were being purchased, and there were some delivery issues so that were reported in the US press. So known as coalition, having operations in the region, the modern crusades of the day, be it in Russia and Ukraine, and in the south in Syria and other countries, are of critical importance for our country and for our own future, our own security as Turkey. What should we do? Which steps should we take? Political Science International Relations students, my question is to Muhammed Bey. In the Syrian foreign policy, you said a lot has been done in 1 year, but domestic policy is still suffering. If external powers do provoke these problems and make it more complicated, how would that affect Turkey? Considering millions of immigrants in Turkey, would it cause any internal domestic conflict in Turkey?
Well, maybe we can say there are three more. Okay, thank you very much for the presentations, for your speeches. My name is Erhan. I would like to have one question to Serhan. Afacan, His Excellency Minister told that our first job will be the negotiation. But in a possible scenario, YPG, in a scenario where the YPG is not in favor of settling, what will be the approach of Iran towards Turkey? Last question. This will be the last question. There will be a few more, but we have consumed all of our time. My name is Arda, a finance student. So you talked about the economic development, but when it comes to